Thank you all for coming. I know a number of you had come to our meeting, our first meeting that we had about this early in the summer, as well as I think a year before when we looked at all of the 4 private roads that we were considering that were going to be affected by sea level rise and storm surge with just 2 feet. All of those roads I can report did flood during the last storm. Will has he has the most recent photos in his presentation tonight. So just to be sure, I let you know that we of course received the Governor's Office of Innovation and the Future grant that is enabling us to take advantage of having this engineering report completed by Will Haskell of Goral Palmer. So I think probably tonight the best thing to do at this point is to turn it over to you, Will. Okay. And you can talk about what people are really interested in here tonight.
Great. Thank you, Marianne.
Mm-hmm. Don't trip on all those. Are you going to come over here?
I am.
Okay, great.
Take a big step.
Great.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, as Marianne said, my name is Will Haskell. I'm a civil engineer and head up our municipal engineering group at Goral Palmer Consulting Engineers. So our office is down in South Portland. We've done a number of projects for the town over the years, roadway reconstruction projects, some culvert projects, a little bit of everything here or there. We assisted Marianne and Casco Bay Estuary project in looking at the Basin Point Road culvert and the little pond there several years ago. And we're really excited to be involved with this project. With me tonight up here at the front table is John Edgerton. He is also a civil engineer that works or consults with Goral Palmer, taking advantage of his expertise. He used to work at Wright Pierce, and he's got some expertise in sea level rise and coastal engineering type work. So I brought him along for support. But so tonight is really a kickoff meeting for this project. So we haven't done a lot of work yet on it. There will be 2 other, at least per our scope of services, there will be 2 other public forums as part of this process as we gather additional information and put together some ideas in terms of how to adapt these 2 sites that we're looking at right now to hopefully accommodate sea level rise. So tonight, again, we're looking at Bethel Point Road at Hen Cove, where the causeway goes across, and we're also looking at Abner Point Road at the boat ramp. So again, it's really just kind of an initial meeting to discuss, and it's just a good opportunity to get some input from you folks, and it's really a good opportunity given the events that we've seen here over the last month. So we're looking forward to hearing input from you on whichever both project sites, concerns, challenges. We're very interested in hearing your input. We're also interested in gathering additional photos if people have other photos from those events. I got Marianne's photos for Abner Point. I don't have a whole lot of photos other than the one over there on the left or right side for the Bethel Point Road causeway. So I haven't seen too many photos of that. That's one of them that I think came off of Facebook, but so I snagged it because it was applicable to tonight's meeting. But definitely interested and can give you contact information if anybody wants to send me photos of some of these these sites. So let's. If I can get this to work. So our agenda tonight, just kind of did a little bit on the introduction side. We're going to give a little bit of background and just some basic information. Then we're going to talk about project goals. Again, looking for input from you folks on that as well, but we've got some information to present there. And then we'll look at both the project sites. We've got a couple base maps started on that. Again, we're going to be adding a lot more to that as we move forward. We're going to talk about the next steps and what the process is going to be for this project, and then really open it up to discussion at the end, so we can get your input and your thoughts on these areas, recent storms, etc. If something comes up in the middle that you have a burning thought that you want to get out, just raise your hand and I'll try and call on you to and we can get that out and talk about it. So just a little bit of background. Again, a lot of this has been presented in various other reports and things that the town has done already, including their sustainability plan. Some of this information has come out of there, and there's been several other reports on vulnerability assessments over the years that have been done. But Harpswell's a pretty unique community in terms of the necks that run out into the ocean with the extensive coastline that they have, and the proximity of basically all the land area to within the shore. So sea level rise and storm surge in the town of Harpswell is going to have some pretty substantial impacts, and that's why we're here tonight, to look at that and to see what we can do to start the process of looking at some of your critical infrastructure and keeping people safe and being able to have access to their properties and businesses, et cetera. So so again, this sustainability plan that was done in 2022, as it says in the plan, it's a living document. It's something that's going to be updated over the years as we find out more information and things. But this is an excellent document. It's an excellent tool for moving forward. It presents a lot of great ideas and a good, solid framework for moving forward with addressing these issues, which are substantial for every community along the coast. But again, given that topography and the configuration of Harpswell, it's vital for this town. So kudos for putting that together. I guess it was done by a committee. I don't know how many people were here or part of that committee, but I'm assuming there's a few of you. So kudos to putting that together, because it's a good, solid document for sure. Couple other documents that are important with this, and one of the reasons we're able to get funding on this project is the Maine Won't Wait plan, so by the Maine Climate Council. So that has a lot of good information in it as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit further on here when we get into some of the goals and discussion. So probably getting ahead of myself in terms of not going through my slides like I should, but getting too excited about it, I guess. So the sustainability plan, this is kind of an important quote out of the plan in terms of continue to plan for how the town will mitigate the future impacts of climate change on Harpswell, especially with respect to the potential for sea level rise, and to begin to make those needed investments. So that's why we're all here tonight, right? So Maine Won't Wait. This is just one thing from this document that's kind of key, that the state is committing to managing for 1.5 feet of relative sea level rise by 2050 and 3.9 feet by 2100. Wondering if that might change now that based on these recent storms. But it continues on to say to prepare to manage for 3 feet of relative sea level rise by 2050 and 8.8 feet by 2100. Let's hope we don't get there. So again, I think those are kind of important numbers. They dance around a lot of numbers we see in the published literature about sea level rise. You see 1.6, 3.9. They feel like kind of odd numbers, but they're kind of relayed here in this document. So one of the things that we want to get a better understanding from you folks is, are we going to commit to manage for 1.5 feet of sea level rise at these roadways, or should we be looking at something more than that? My sense is by 2050, again, given some of these recent events, that if we plan to manage for 1.5 feet of sea level rise, it may not be quite enough. So again, we want to have some discussion about that in terms of what we want to look at in terms of if we start looking at raising roads and raising infrastructure. Obviously, the higher you raise it, costs more money, impacts the resource more on each side. But if you want to have access to your properties and to your businesses and have emergency service available to you when at times of critical need, when these storms come through, 1.5, 1.6 feet may not be what we really want to start with. And I think going back to our Basin Point Road project that we had several years ago, I think we kind of tossed the 1.6 foot out the window and went to 3 or 4 feet and 6 feet.
3.5 and 6 feet.
Yeah. So anyway, we can talk about that a little bit later on as well. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about resilience, and adaptation, and what does that really mean? In the Maine Won't Wait document, they outline a few things relative to resilience, and you probably all know this, especially if you've been participating in the the sustainability plan, but it can differ depending on which community you're living in and what the ultimate goals are. But ultimately, it's really about creating these groups, your resilience committee, and starting that process and starting to get people involved in planning and making decisions in terms of how you want to move forward, how you want to address these items. Do you want to address these items? There may be some situations where they don't, but it also, and it's not really on this slide, but there are some other things to think about too, and they're hard topics to think about, but there's been discussion in other parts of the country that are going to be hit hard by sea level rise about you're not only talking about resiliency and adaptation, making modifications to infrastructure, but when is it time to retreat? And so those discussions are part of that whole thing as well, and those are very hard discussions to have. Obviously, if you're an owner of a residence or a business or property, and to make that decision to retreat, things have got to get pretty tough. But there are things that may cause that I guess, to be forced on people too, and things when you start hearing in some states, like down in Florida, you know, you hear about FEMA not offering flood insurance anymore, for example, or things like that. And if you don't have that insurance available, you know, what is that next step? So anyway, those are all out there. I don't think we're in that mode at this point in the town of Harpswell, but it is something out there that is being discussed in other parts of the country that are being impacted by sea level rise. So just thought you should at least be aware of it if you hadn't heard of that. So the big thing with this, again, is all about community dialogue. Again, one of the reasons for these meetings and the continued meetings as we move forward on this is to keep the stakeholders and everybody in the loop and gather your input and information so we can incorporate that as best we can into the plan, into the proposed improvements. And so it's all about, you know, trying to gather as much input as we can. And again, you folks are the ones who live it. You're there. You see it. I don't live in Harpswell, so I can't see it, you know, day to day. And you guys are right there on the front line. So a little bit of technical piece, which you may not be able to see that very well. I'm going to give a copy of this presentation to Mary Ann so she can get it out to folks or post it on the website. But one of the things that we just need to be careful about when we talk about sea level rise is the datum, the elevation datum. So there's a couple different datums that are used. So we've got kind of the tide gauge, or the typical tide elevations that we're talking about. And we also have datums that are used on typical maps. So if you look at like a USGS map or a survey plan, if you get a surveyor involved and you get a topographic map of your property, for instance, they use a datum that's NAVD 88. It's a technical term, but it's different than the tide gauge. So when you see the tide elevations, I think the high tide at the 13th, I guess the January 13th storm was like 14.5, 14.57, something like that. If you compare that to NAVD 88, the NAVD 88 elevation is elevation 9. So there's about 5 feet of plus or minus difference between the two. So it's important when you're looking at elevations to kind of understand the datums, because if you're looking at one in NAVD 88 and one into the tide gauge, you just want to be able to understand the differential there. So we had some discussion about that on Basin Point Road, because there was some confusion about that in reading different documents and understanding what the datum is. So we can get more into that when we get further down the line and start talking about the improvements here. So project goals. Again, this is a good discussion topic that we can talk to you folks about. But so our understanding going into this is that again, we were given 2 project areas, Bethel Point and Abner Point, and basically our understanding is that we're looking at alternatives to adapt those 2 locations to, minimize the chances that they're going to be overtopping with certain levels of sea level rise, certain levels of storm surge. So determining what those levels are is important. We can we can do multiple scenarios, so we can do 1.5 and 4. We can do 1.5, 4, and 6. It's just if we can toss one of those out the window early on, it makes it a little bit easier in the long run. But either way, it is beneficial for you folks to look at multiple alternatives, or for us to look at multiple alternatives, and provide cost estimates for those, so you can evaluate, okay, if we raise this road to to accommodate 6 feet of sea level rise, it's going to cost this number. If we do 4, it's here. Someone's got to make a decision in terms of how much can everybody afford, and what's the best path forward there. So. And none of us have a crystal ball to know exactly where this is all gonna top out, or so they're all kind of, there's probabilities around all of those different levels of potential sea level rise. So another goal, and it kind of they all tie together, and they all tie into cost, is to identify permitting. So there's going to be environmental impacts to anything we do when we start talking about raising roadways, to even doing less invasive type things, such as living shorelines or things like that. In my opinion, these two locations don't really align very well for implementing living shorelines as solutions or adaptation tools. I think with what we have here, it's really kind of raise the road, or that's really one of the only options I think we have in this case. But we can talk about things like living shorelines. They will help mitigate some of the lower storms and lower surge events and things. But with the events that we saw recently, I mean, the living shoreline is going to get overtopped just like the roadway did, and it's probably not going to do too much to help out. So, and then, as I said, ultimately we'll be preparing some opinions of cost to help you folks decide how you want to proceed, because ultimately what we want to get to at the end of this is, and it's outlined in here in your sustainability plan, is to come up with a plan to make improvements to this. And as you all know, these aren't the only 2 roads in town. We just submitted a proposal to Marianne for 2 new roads that they're looking to potentially write a grant for. Dingley Island Bridge and Causeway, and Lowell's Cove Road. So, and there's more than that beyond that as well. So there's more to come on this. But so I guess with that, John, is there anything you would like to add in terms of what I've said so far?
No, maybe just to re-emphasize one thing. You touched on the cost-benefit relationship, and I think that's an important consideration. We've got some targeted numbers to work with in terms of raising, but it's not unusual to look at a couple of different scenarios when you're pricing it out, because almost everything in life comes down to a cost-benefit relationship. And if you can raise it 3 feet for a certain price, and you can raise it 4 feet for just a little bit more, it may be worth doing a little bit more. So there are a number of different scenarios like that where it's worth understanding what you're going to get, because the benefit that you get intuitively from raising a road higher is a greater level of resiliency, either in the shorter duration, or it's going to last longer before it becomes a problem and needs to be addressed again by a future generation.
Great, thank you. So raise of hands, and maybe you're here for both, but how many people are interested in, more interested in Bethel Point Road? Okay, the people in the back. And then I won't make the assumption that the people in front, but Abner Point Road? Yeah, all right. Excellent. So, and again, these are probably going to be hard to see on this screen, but we've started kind of pulling together some base maps. So I'll step back a step here. So this project, we aren't doing actual. We haven't hired a surveyor to go out and actually do a full-blown existing conditions topographic survey. So we're going to be utilizing kind of existing available information, aerial photo, base map, and what we call LiDAR topography, which we can download from the state of Maine. And so that's what we have here. So this is, again, Bethel Point Road, the causeway, and we've added the LiDAR topo, and we are going to go out and do some basic survey on our own. We don't have in-house survey at our firm, but we will go out with a laser level and shoot some elevations and things and get some critical data in the coming weeks. We will be doing that at both locations. But so anyway, we're gonna be utilizing this available data and this plan. So we've got a plan view up here. We have. I probably have to take this with me if I'm going away. But we've got a profile here. Basically shows that the low point of the road, which is right over where the culvert is right around elevation 9 or so. And interestingly, it's basically that elevation at Abner Point Road as well in terms of the low point. So they're very similar in terms of the low points. So we will be adding information to this plan as we kind of move forward. So this slide just gives some information. The existing culvert, if everybody who's familiar with Bethel Point Road, was actually replaced not too long ago. So there was an old corrugated metal pipe there, and it was replaced with a concrete box culvert that was 12 feet wide by 10 feet tall. And we put in some, I guess, I'll call it stream bed material, even though it's not a stream, but we put some bed material in the bottom of that culvert. Again, road elevation, I think it's more around 9 than 9.5, but somewhere in that vicinity. And then, so when we start looking at raising that road, the key things that we need to be cognizant of is, as we raise the road, the side slopes are going to have to go out further into the resource. So there's going to be some impacts to the coastal wetlands on either side. But we also have to be worried about roads and driveways in the vicinity of that area that we're raising the road. So in this case, on the north end, and if I go back here, it doesn't really show very well, and but Hen Cove Road takes off right here, and that there's going to be some impacts there if we start looking at significant, I would say anything over 2 feet, you're going to start to impact that intersection. So one of the key things that we're going to be looking at as we move forward, and it's probably more critical at Abner Point because there's more driveways, there's a boat ramp, there's a building or a number of buildings in there, is how does changing the road elevation impact these side roads and other pieces of infrastructure in there, because that could all add to the cost of this project if we have to reconstruct or build retaining walls or remove pieces of infrastructure. In this case, you know, we've got this one road here. I believe there's a driveway further up here, somewhere in this vicinity. A little bit farther away, not convinced that we will have too much impact there at that driveway. But Hen Cove Road we'll definitely have to look at a little bit. And then causeway is about 170 feet long. I talked about the wetland impacts on both sides. This is kind of a cryptic looking image over here, but it's an excerpt from the FEMA flood map. So I believe this is Hen Cove Road right here, and the causeway is right in here. So not sure what the status is of the new flood maps that are coming out, but I think this is, if that's,
March.
is it March? Okay, thank you
March
for
or
that, Kevin. I knew they were coming out sometime soon, so we'll take a look at that and see if that changes, because this is showing 100-year flood elevation, that elevation 9 here, which is essentially right at that road level.
Project recommend changes of Hen Cove Road. Looks like it's just very vulnerable to sea level rise, as is the culvert. So are you looking just at the culvert, or will you be looking at neighboring impacts as well?
We're going to be looking at the segment of road to get, say we talk about 4 feet. If we're looking at raising the road 4 feet, we're going to be looking at whatever segment of road that is in that vicinity. There may be another segment of road further down here that's not really connected to this piece that we would be looking at raising that 4 feet. But most likely in this case, it would be the whole causeway that would be raised. So if I go back to this, you know, I would envision that we're going to be looking at this whole causeway in here and bringing that all up.
Yeah, I guess my question was, what about Hen Cove Road, which is private but connected?
Yeah, so at this point, we would be looking at how the changes on Bethel Point Road would impact the intersection, but I don't think we're going too far down Hen Cove Road. Does that sound?
It might be a good opportunity to just mention that, because I know many of you live past the bridge itself, south going towards Bethel Point. And this particular project is dealing with just the bridge at Hen Cove. That is what we got funding to research. And it only has to do with public property, and it's town infrastructure. That's not to say that there aren't other questions that have come up since last week that there's concerns about. And that it would be something that we're very interested in knowing about, but would have to then think further out of how we would be addressing that.
Right.
But it would not be included as part of this project.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne. Yes, in the red.
You've made reference to the effects on the coastal wetlands, but can you describe, perhaps through examples of other projects you've been involved in, exactly what those impacts look like and how you've treated them in the past? Or if you can't give those examples, give us a bigger picture of what it would mean here.
Yeah, Basin Point Road, but essentially in terms of what it would look like is, Trying to think. I probably don't have a good picture of it with me, but so as you go across the causeway, there's side slopes on either side of the roadway that slope down to the coastal wetland. In this case, I think there's a fair amount of ledge on both sides, but the side slopes slope down into the coastal wetland. So, as if you can imagine, as you raise that road up, the higher you raise that road up, the farther those slopes, you're going to have to rebuild those slopes. The farther those slopes are going to kind of slope out into the coastal wetlands.
I understand the
So-
physical description, but I'm wondering how you can evaluate the negative influence on the wetlands themselves and what we would be losing, since those wetlands are actually helpful when it comes to rising seas, but we'd be cutting into them. So
Right.
how do you evaluate how much damage is done?
Yeah, so in this case, when we got to that point of, that would most likely be evaluated in the next stage of design in terms of the function and value of those wetlands. And we would have to present a report to the permitting agencies that says, this is what the function of values of those wetlands are within our impact area. And then they would have to evaluate whether that was acceptable or not, to allow the project to be permitted. So in this case, I don't know, John, did you have something you wanted to say on that? Because
I could just weigh in and say, a lot of times what happens in a case like this, where you're gonna be placing fill and it's gonna extend out into water, there's what's called a benthic
Right.
environment, which is basically the mud on the bottom, and we'd be placing new fill on top of that. And as Will had said, in order to get a permit, you need to submit, usually a wetlands biologist would prepare the report based on an assessment of what values exist within that benthic environment. Are there marine worms, is that, objectively, what is the value of that? It's a very small fraction, and there's 100 more acres of that in the cove, or is that a specific area that provides a higher than usual value or whatever? And that's something that the wetlands biologist would do. The benthic area becomes a permanent impact, and that's taken into account in the permitting, and a lot of times there's a requirement for mitigation or compensation,
Right.
or what have you. It's just the way the permitting process rolls. The emergent vegetation that may grow on the side of the embankment is going to be covered up with stuff, but what happens is when you build the new embankment further out, usually that emergent vegetation reestablishes, and there's,
Right.
in the long term, there's relatively little net impact to that piece of it. But the focus is going to be primarily on aquatic organisms and the things that go along with that. But these are relatively routine types of impacts, and in the grand scheme of projects that happen in coastal areas, these aren't going to be enormous impacts. There are other types of projects that have much, much larger impacts, dredging, things like that, but there's a lot more benthic impact.
So some of the things that we would do, so we have to show that we're minimizing the amount of wetland area that we're impacting. So, on a typical roadway, we would design side slopes to be relatively flat. So if you were to drive off them or whatever, you wouldn't roll over your car, for example. In this case, we're going to have guardrail along both sides, just like there is today. We're required to, because the permitting agencies require us to tighten up those slopes to a much steeper slope. You can only go so tight, or you can go to a retaining wall system. But typically, they require you to tighten those slopes up to minimize the impacts. And we have to do that whenever we're crossing a wetland, whether it's a coastal wetland or a freshwater wetland. We have to tighten up those slopes, put in guardrail, because it isn't a recoverable slope when we tighten it up to what they allow us to tighten it up to.
Yeah, there's really a three-phased approach. The agencies who review the permits, their first goal is can you avoid it? In a case like this, if we make the case that we can't avoid it, we've got to raise the road for obvious reasons. Then the next thing is to minimize it, which is what Will was just talking about.
Right.
And then typically you're required to compensate for whatever your unavoidable impacts are associated with that. Or that's a whole nother discussion in terms of what the mechanisms are for compensating. Either there are local places or there's a statewide program where projects that can't realistically compensate within their own area, money is paid that goes into a fund and then is administered for larger compensation projects that achieve the overall objectives.
Okay, thank you.
I think the black in the back there is next.
Two-parter. The first one's really quick. Have you walked the area of either one of these roads?
Yes.
You have, okay. Are you aware of there's on Bethel Point, I'm a Bethel Point resident, we live right at the end, at the town landing, there's a boatyard there. I'm the boatyard. Anyways, are you aware that there's more vulnerability and a concerning area a little further down towards the town landing than the bridge?
So as Mary Ann said, I mean, yeah, there.
Yeah, is that part of what she was saying? That's another whole other.
Yeah, so there are numerous areas within town, not just on Bethel Point Road, that may be of concern to other people as well. And the town is, I don't know how you make the decision on which one goes first, but because there's quite a few of them in the town of Harpswell. But this project itself is specific to these two areas.
And the bridge. Even though the other area is more concerning. It rises a lot higher in that other area than that bridge.
Yeah. If you want to weigh in on that, you can. I don't have the background to weigh in on that question.
I'm winging it a little bit here. But our projects have to do with public property. And yes, there are other town roads that are public roads that are probably in similar situations to what you're mentioning. My sense going forward is we're going to have to start not assessing, but finding out where they are. And then we would do the same thing, because these are planning projects for future infrastructure changes. And what we did with the 5 roads we had here is I don't know if you recall, we talked about a prioritization system that had to do with how many houses were served for here.
Beyond this point.
Beyond this point,
Right.
would be cut off. But there's a list and that I'd be glad to share with you. We would probably, as we would do this, we would apply that same type of criteria to the inventory of the town roads that are being affected. And then you would go down and try to do the same thing. It would take time, but you would, using this prioritization system, choose the ones that are most drastically affected. I don't know if that's kind of.
Right, I mean, in my opinion, and I think anybody that lives on the Bethel Point Road, that area, especially Morton's, would find it more concerning than the bridge. But,
I understand that.
so, I mean, I get what you're saying, so.
However, I guess by the time we got to this point, this was a project that we started in 2016, looking at where the streams and areas would overtop the roadway. And that these 5 rows were developed a while ago. We did not inventory all the roads themselves.
The 5 roads are Basin Cove, Avenue Point, Bethel, Dingley Island, and what else?
Lowell's Cove?
Lowell's Cove, that's right. Lowell's Cove, thanks.
Yeah. For me or for,
Thought there was one person up here, yeah.
This is probably totally not conceivable, but if you consider the option of making it a bridge instead of a causeway, how much more does that entail? And my other thought is, again, I'm probably way off by doing this, but you could go right around that whole thing with a new road. I mean, I realize we're facing what we're facing and not restructuring the whole town. And there's gonna be a million places that are gonna get flooded. Basin Point Road,
So you're saying going around Hen Cove with a road instead of coming across this?
I mean, it may be totally
So,
feasible.
yeah, so I mean, from a cost perspective,
But looking at the future, I realize it's a cost
Yep.
perspective. The bridge thing seems like,
yep,
I mean, I don't know how much more it costs to build a bridge than to build that causeway out and slope it off, but
Yep.
you wouldn't have, seems to me like with a bridge, you wouldn't have the problems with slopes and.
you wouldn't, but you've got 170, 180 feet of bridge. So ultimately, cost is going to become a factor one way or the other in this, because someone's got to fund it, and some of that funding is going to come from the town. So it may not all come from the town. You may be able to get grant money to fund portions of it as well.
Probably unfeasible, but
Yep.
it just seems like.
But you're absolutely right. It's an option. A bridge could be one of our options that we present in this study.
Seems like it's
make
less
that part of the
environmental
concept.
impact.
This is the concept study.
It may be less environmental impact. 170-foot span probably is going to have a pier or two in the middle of it, but you're right. There may be a little bit less environmental impact, but we've got to be able to present information back to the town that says, okay, what's the cost benefit of the environmental impact versus the cost benefit of the bridge? And so that's the purpose of this study, is to consider different options.
The roads aren't cheap to build either, but it seems like you could go right around that whole mess, tie back in there somewhere.
It's a long chunk of road, but
You got the deal
Yep.
further down the road where the road bed is not very high off the high water mark.
right,
But we've got that all over town too.
you're right. So I've got gentleman in the back there first.
Yeah, I was, just to point out the big picture here, is that the whole purpose of addressing the issue is to be able to maintain access to what's an important commercial as well as public access to the water at the end of the road. If you don't address the low point where the creek that feeds the wetland to the west of Bethel Point Road runs under a culvert at Bethel Point Road and empties into Hen Cove, where it flooded, same as it flooded here at the bridge, you're gonna end up with a bridge that works and flooding 500 more feet down the road and still not have access to where you wanna have access to. So I understand, the funding and the application of grants and so forth. We're pointedly addressing the bridge here, but the project overall should include this low point as well, otherwise it's all for naught, really.
So again, the town has to balance a lot of things here, and there's only so much money to go around too. So they're taking advantage of grant money that's available. Takes time and effort to put those grant applications together. You may or may not get the grant application. They've been successful in getting the grant application for this project. But I can't necessarily answer all these questions because I don't have the background in the town finances, but I mean, it would be great if the town could go in and address all of these low points all at one time and do these studies on all of these locations. It's just, there's just not enough town funding to do all that work all in one clean sweep. So we may get to that point. We may get to that as another project down the road. But it's just, I don't see how we're going to be able to address them all in one shot here. I'd love to be working on all of them in one shot, but
But we don't need to.
But that's interesting also, because we have to realize this is an engineering, top-level engineering assessment of what the cost is going to do this project.
Yeah.
We're not doing construction at this time. The point you bring up is very good.
Yep.
If
And-
you're going to assess the cost of the project, which is to maintain access at the end of the road where the commercial fishing is required to have access, then you have to consider the entire stretch of road all the way down to that access. To just, plan and plan to fund a project at the bridge and not address the other low points, you're gonna end up with another problem and inaccessibility based on, some short-sightedness here.
I understand what you're saying, and I'm not trying to cut you off here, but I'm also looking at the clock and seeing that we haven't gotten to the next project yet. All I can say is I think it's really great that we're having this tonight. We have been made aware of this situation. And I think we will talk about it more, but it is, at this point, not included in this study. But we're not talking about installation.
Would the engineers be interested in at least looking at the culvert area while they come, or is it like literally no money, no?
I can't answer that at this
Okay,
point,
cool.
but we'll keep talking, okay?
If I could just add to that, though, my guess is that by the time we are done with this study in its current scope, looking at these areas and defining elevations and costs and things like that, my guess is that the data that comes out of that will be able to will be of value in looking at other areas in the community and being able to make kind of a rough estimate of costs based on, we're doing this much work here, it's gonna cost this much, and these are the regulatory issues associated with that. My guess is you'll be able to look at other areas using that data and make a assessment of what the costs and the regulatory issues, the timeframes, and the funding availability and all the other things are that would go with those other areas. This should facilitate to some degree conclusions about the other areas, even though it won't provide specific data in that regard.
good point, John. In the yellow.
Yeah, my name's Ken. I live just on the south side of the bridge. So I was there as your unpaid observer watching what was happening. And in some regards, I think you're going at it the wrong way from what I saw.
Okay.
My place was built in 1960 by Susan Pulsifer. Some of you may know who she is. And I bought it in 1991, so I've seen a lot of tides in the past years. I saw one summer storm, it actually got up to the bridge, and I found my skiff was the only time I've ever hit bottom on a guide rail, coming up in there. But what I saw, I talked to the guys who replaced the big round corrugated culvert with the square one. And I was talking to them about the depth that they use and how they came up with all this stuff. And he told me that part of the where the culvert went was due to migrating fish, the depth of it. And I said, there's not many fish that migrate here. He said, I realize that, but that's not the parameters, he said, we have to use for the lower end of it. That's one thing. But I want everyone to and this was quite an event, but picture your sink. You turn on the faucet and you got water running pretty well through the drain. And then at some point, the drain gets overwhelmed, and then you see the water start coming up on the side. That's what I observed with this bridge. When the tide got to 10, over 10, it was over the top of the culvert. At that point, I was trying to find the biggest anchor that I had to hold my place down. Because I thought, I'm screwed. You know, it's just, I watched how fast it rose. So the water started to spread, it started to rise, and then it started to go over the bridge. So what I saw is, for a storm that we just experienced, it's not big enough. I stood there and I thought, if this culvert was larger, this water would have passed through before it started coming up into, I was getting high water, obviously, but it really started to come up from a tide of 10 feet to a tide of 11. And that's when you see the pictures of the water running across Bethel Point. On the other side, if that water was allowed to go through with a larger culvert, there's a whole area to absorb such an event. But when you take the road culvert and build it up, you're just building a dam by leaving that opening. And I don't stand much of a chance down there, because you just push more water back.
So,
It's the apex of the cove, of the point, and all that water is coming that way with the wind and the tide. And it just couldn't get through.
If we didn't have Dave here, we would have all been stuck all the way, because he was just pulling out plank by plank of wood, and without our darling Dave, we wouldn't have been able
Yeah,
to cross.
and the other thing I wanted to mention, this gentleman's idea, and I like, historical background. And he's exactly right. At one time, there was a bridge there. And the road, you can look at the stone walls, the road did go up and around the mill cove and then back down around to the point again. So that was historically there,
so,
before 1900.
right.
Then you gotta buy all that.
So I guess one comment I'll make on your comment, and I appreciate your comments, if we went and put a bridge in there, like you talked about over there, 170-foot long bridge that was open, may have a pier in the middle of it or whatever, but it's 3 times as big as, the opening is 3 times as big as that culvert there. If we have the elevation of that bridge, that's the same elevation as that causeway that's out there today, doesn't make any difference really how big that opening is. If the water comes up over the elevation of that road, it's going to go over the road. So it's the opening of, I understand your thought process, and I understand what you're saying in terms of the opening of that culvert, but if the elevation of the road is at 9 feet and the tide elevation comes up to 10 feet, it's going to go over the road no matter how big the culvert is under the road.
I watched it happen. I'm not saying it would stop it. I'm saying a culvert that could accept more of the incoming water would have mitigated some of the problems that I was impacted by.
Okay. No, I appreciate that comment.
Build a new road, go right around the whole place.
I had, yeah, I had, I'm not familiar with, I've probably driven over it, but not known where I was at the time, so I just looked it up to say, where are we talking about? And the one, I guess I kind of have a question, what is the cost to build a bridge versus a road? Because if I look here, and I'm not on Bethel Point Road, so I can't, but I can imagine as I look here where the other places people might be concerned about. And then I look at the whole finger and I think, well, if we come off whatever other road this is, Sage Road, there's a Sage Road up there, skip that apart entirely and in some ways look at Harpswell and kind of focus on, we got a lot of roads here built right along the ocean. Because the roads kind of built up wherever people were, and that's how they got there. But at this point, the cheapest land is sitting in the middle, where you can't see the ocean from either side. But if you buy up some of that land and start running these roads down the middle and instead run, in essence, driveways or whatever, off them out to the shore, you're not wiping out everybody's road every time something comes in. Obviously, people have to concern themselves with what's happening on their own property. But at least they know if they drive straight inland, they will hit a road that will take them in, that we might hope will be there for 100 years to come or something, until you lose the entire point. And maybe while there isn't any development, and I'm not saying there isn't, because I can't, I'm drilling down, who knows what I'm actually seeing here, but if grabbing up some of that, taking those opportunities while that land is not geared to somebody in the same way, might be a better, really long-term approach to it than looking at Bethel Point or and every other road that sits right there on the shore.
Yeah. Not sure the town has eminent domain power for taking people's land for new roads, but the DOT does, but
We don't want to move over to
Abner Point.
Because of the meeting.
All right, we're going to move over to Abner Point. So I appreciate everybody's input, and I'm sure there'll be more time later on in the other public forums to talk as well. So Abner
Yeah.
Point Road is
Okay, yeah, that's a mess.
so here we have the boat ramp is right here. Booby Lane's here. The town parking area, town parcel is here. What is that called? Johnson Field?
Johnson Park, yeah.
I'm not sure what that.
Appropriately.
Yeah, just
Okay, so it's, yeah.
They used to
Yeah, it's
fly
our
over,
John
when I go
Field,
to
you know,
build the lumps to people, they
Yeah,
would
it's
diesel.
100 years or more.
so again, similarly as I mentioned before, the low point in the elevation of the road is actually looks a little bit less than 9 here, but might be in the 8.5 range, somewhere in there. But
Sure.
so here there was some upgrades to the boat ramp done as recently as 2019. So in this area, if we look at raising a segment of road in there, most likely going to have impacts to the boat ramp. 25 Abner Point Road, which is the building right next to the boat ramp, it was in the water based on the pictures that I saw. And then the Luby Lane intersection will also be impacted, so there'll have to be some adjustments there. Now, is that a private or is that a town road?
Ruby Lane?
Yeah.
Luby Lane is private, and the gentleman living on here is here.
Okay. All right, so we can open up this to discussion as well. So who'd like to go first?
How much of Abner Road are you talking about, or do you know that?
Abner Point Road?
Yeah.
Yep, so let's see here. Could be about 300 feet. There seems to be a little hump in the middle here, but there's about 300 feet.
Can you orient that on the map part that you're showing there?
Where that is?
Yeah, what?
Yeah, so that's 2. So basically from right in here, 100, 200, so basically in this area. Yeah, so if for this property here, if you can imagine the road coming up whatever we decide, but if you say 4 feet, that road will be, well up the side of that building. And you would either have to put in a retaining wall there or move the building, raise the building. And then obviously raising that road would also create a steeper access point to the boat ramp as well. But
I own 40 Happy Point Road, which is that next one past Luby Lane.
this one?
Yep.
Okay.
I don't know if it's that one, I can't see.
This is Luby Lane here.
Yeah,
It
to
is. Yeah,
the
that's
left of that triangle.
Yep, this one. Yep.
Nope. I don't know, I can't see.
Yeah, he had it right. Yeah, right, Jim, that's it.
Yeah.
Right there. Luby Lane.
Yeah, I guess that's a house there, right?
It is. That's a house.
That's your house, Jim. Not used to looking at it from that angle.
No, it's different.
Looks different.
But I was wondering,
Gail's driving.
what do you feel? Yeah, Gail drives. What the impact would be on, as far as that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think again,
And again, I'm thinking about this road.
yeah, we're,
You could come back to this contour line right here.
yeah. So there's a contour line right here and a contour line right here. So again, maybe it's a little bit longer than 300 feet. It's maybe 350 or something like that. But, so I don't think it will come up to your driveway, or looks like you've got,
Tying in grade-wise,
Yeah.
right around by your driveway, so it wouldn't the street elevation wouldn't change where your driveway comes out, but as you go towards
It'll build
Luby
up.
Lane,
Yeah.
it'll be up a little higher.
Then does that shoulder go towards the house, or are you building on the? Yeah. Because there's not a lot of room.
Oh, yeah.
Not a lot of room between
yeah,
where the road is right now. and-
you're tight right at this corner here. The house looks like it's angled a little bit away from the road the further you get in this direction,
Yep.
so. But again, with it tying in there wouldn't be much of an embankment right there. It would tie into existing kind of at that point.
All right.
And then it might get a little bit more of a, you might get a little bit more of an embankment
It looks
here.
like it's over 50 feet or so that you'd be picking up the full reveal of whatever the
Right.
fill height is.
Yep.
How high are you talking about?
Well, that's the topic of this discussion here, so if.
It is a topic of discussion, but maybe it isn't, because, are you charged to come up with one concept, 2 concepts, 3 concepts? You mentioned up to 3 at the start of this, but we really need to look at all 3, or are we just looking at a concept, we can kind of, plus or minus at that point?
Well, I mean, I think,
Pick a number, we're gonna raise it 2 feet.
the one thing, we talked about the 1.5 or
Yeah, sure.
1.6. I mean,
So one,
how's everybody feel about that? Do you
Doesn't
think,
seem
based
like
on the
it's
recent
gonna be-
storms, that 1.6 is something that we really want to look at?
No.
maybe yes, maybe
Be
not.
good till next year.
Maybe yes, maybe not. It's,
Summer will be fine.
What happened to the road during the storm? Did it flood?
Oh, yeah.
oh,
Yes.
it definitely flooded.
Sure.
Yeah.
There were waves going over the road.
As, you know, it's-
This guy had 2 feet of water in his house.
You guys are exposed.
But this-
My grandfather's day, there was a bridge there. In Ron's day.
In previous assessments, we have come up with, and it was kind of a discussion with the committee, two scenarios.
2 concepts?
And that was the Basin Point Road project.
Right.
When we first started looking at it, we had listed 5 concepts. And as we started discussing the project, we realized that it didn't make sense. If you're going to spend that much money, you want to get a little bit, you're not going on a build for today, you want to build for the future.
Right.
And I'm not sure, and I believe we talked about a couple of concepts here.
Yeah, I mean,
And you pick you pick one at 3 feet, say, I'm picking a number out of the top of my head, and then one that would be further down the road.
And we don't,
Yeah, and I think going back to what we said earlier, a lot of the final decision, I suspect, will come down to the cost-benefit balance. And in order to understand the cost-benefit relationship, you need two scenarios for comparison purposes. My guess is, as said before, that doing a lot more than that doesn't really achieve anything, and it waters down what you get out of the scenarios that you look at.
I have a question regarding the projected sea level rise, the figures you gave. First of all, how old are they? And second of all, how often are they amended as we learn more about what's actually happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure, I mean, there's probably somebody out there who's amending them as we speak, but are they published? Is the question. And does everybody have access to those? So there's several entities out there that are kind of publishing those numbers. NOAA is one. That's a reference. That's probably was the basis for some of the numbers that were presented in this document here in terms of what they were planning to mitigate for and what they're planning to manage for are based off of some of those kind of national studies that look at different areas around the country. But so it's not something that, you know, we're getting updated estimates of sea level rise on a, you know, monthly, bi-yearly, yearly basis. They're out there for a period of time. So I haven't seen anything new more than what we've kind of talked about for numbers at this point. But
Well, the Maine Climate Action Plan is talking about revising the state.
Yep.
That will take probably a month or two, I would think.
Oh, I would say
or
more than
longer.
that. Yeah.
But to answer your question, we follow what is, and at this point, the state has a recommendation and what they're using, and we kind of tap into that information.
Well, and the state's data, what they work off is based on extremely large and complex computer models for the storm surge that take into effect for different areas in the community, the fetch across the bays for different storm and wind scenarios combined with base sea level rise. And in order for those to be completely revamped is years. And just for comparison purposes, for those of you who remember 1987, there were huge floods in the state. And on the major river systems, the Kennebec and the Androscoggin, that equated to roughly a 100-year storm. Well, what they found was that all the flood maps for places like Gardner and Hollowell and places that have all the flooding, that those flood maps did not accurately predict the flooding for a 100-year storm. And so the USGS, who's responsible for all the modeling that goes into the FEMA flood maps, went back and they were like, great, now we have actual flood data that we can use to calibrate our models. And they went back and they reissued those. And it took 5-6 years in some cases for them to redo those models based on that data, which is probably a simpler process than what goes into these coastal flooding mappings with the slosh models and things. So the bottom line is the people who manage the models probably rub their hands with glee a little bit on these storms because it provides real data with which to calibrate the models. But it's not like the models are going to be recalibrated. New data is going to be available this month, next month, or this year. You may see something next year that comes out of that, but it's not a quick turnaround to recalibrate these very large and complex models, which are the basis for the numbers that the Maine Climate Action Plan uses. Has Peter Slavinsky been down and talked to the group at all or anything?
He came down in 2016 when we first kicked off our project.
Yeah, so again, kind of, you know, the guy I always look to as being the expert on all this stuff. If you have any questions for him or something, he's probably the guy that can give you a way better answer than I can on
Right.
what will come out of these storms in terms of recalibrated models and new data, but don't expect anything in the real short term.
My name's Richard Lehman. Drive, not lane. Just to help with confusion. At the end of the road, at Avenue Point Road, and Louis Drive comes together, there's a culvert there. It drains fresh water, I believe, a spring across the street. Now, would they be raising that culvert?
I mean, if there's drainage that's going through it today, we probably wouldn't be raising the culvert. We would be keeping the culvert where it is.
So what the problem was, the storm surge, before it went over the road, it went through the culvert and up,
So
it went backwards.
the culvert is under Luby Lane?
Thank you. Sorry. It's under Avenue Point Road,
Okay.
and it goes right parallel to Louis.
So it runs this way?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
So say it's, because the storm was 5, say 5 feet is the right number to go. What's the next steps from that? Is that, like, we've said there are multiple different options. If the whole community commits to 5 feet on these 2 projects, what, do we vote on that? How does this proceed? I mean, how do we move forward?
I don't know if there's a vote involved, but I mean, it's really just providing guidance to us so we know what to proceed with.
Okay. It
And
just seems like already exceeded such and such number, then we're only gonna get more.
It's a 100-year storm, so we'll get it again another 100 year, and the road lived through it, so.
well,
This last storm.
That would be
was-
one point, is addressing the defenses of the road for these events. I can show you, I'm on Hen Cove Road, right at Hen Cove Bethel Pine entrance.
Yeah.
And during that surge, that storm, the water surged back and forth over the road. Pretty high waves at some point. But you can tell where it started to scour the lighter material on the causeway. So the next event or the one after that, we're gonna start losing pavement there. And then we're gonna lose access, whether we plan to raise it or, so they're mitigating effects that could take place without huge infrastructure changes that would harden their defenses for current situations, rather than planning for, there are other places that will succumb to forces before that 8 feet is reached, and no point in getting to Bethel Point if you can't get off Cundy's Harbor Road or something like that.
right. So there's kind of an immediate mitigation thing associated with these recent storms, if I understood your question correctly. And I actually was speaking with the town administrator before this meeting today about coming down and looking at a couple roads, but also looking at Bethel Point Road at the causeway. And they were out there visiting with the FEMA representatives, I guess, not too long ago, a couple of days ago.
I missed them.
And
I caught them.
so there's likely going to be some disaster monies available for kind of fixing issues that happened with that recent storm at several locations. Bethel Point Road may be one of them, but there are others as well. So I heard Little Island Road got kind of totally annihilated. And then there were a couple other places that she asked us to look at. So for that kind of immediate thing, again, as Mary Ann said, this is just kind of a preliminary study. We don't have funding for picking an option and going out and bidding it and building it yet. So if there needs to be repairs to to Bethel Point Road in the interim, we're going to be kind of looking at that as well. So not part of this study.
No. this is really rather difficult, because if we had the meeting, the first time we were supposed to have it at the beginning of the month,
Yeah.
the conversation tonight would have been completely different. It's really hard, and I understand, it's really hard not to bring up what has happened over the last week. But to your point regarding Hen Cove, I have to mention that we have been monitoring, taking pictures at Hen Cove on king tides for 5 years, about. And we noticed during the time when Deirdre was taking pictures that erosion was occurring around where the guardrails are inserted. We contacted the road commissioner, Ron Ponziani, and part of maintenance, he came out and filled that and took care of it. My sense is this type of situation would be handled through maintenance and the town road that FEMA money might be used for.
Exactly.
This is kind of like a completely different project.
So my family owns 25 Avenue Point as well as 30 across the street.
Okay.
So after the last storm, obviously I was up here when it happened, and after that I did start looking at what some of the potential options would be to either raise the structure, or raise the grade of the land, or whatever, so that we don't lose the property. But obviously I would want it to align with whatever project will be happening. So will your study kind of provide me guidance on what I can do for my private property to make sure that I don't have like a retaining wall behind me, which is not what I would want, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think, given the proximity of that property in particular, this one here, yes, what comes out of this report is going to provide you some guidance in terms of what, but again, ultimately, the town needs to decide what they're going to do. So we may present a couple options, and the town needs to decide what they want to do, and then they need to decide and figure out how to fund that. So the big picture of this in terms of when that will ultimately get done, or constructed, something gets constructed, I can't predict that right now. And I don't think Mary Ann can either. So there's still a ways to go before we know that, A, there's a project and what that project is. We're going to present some options. So I don't think I have a great answer for you at this point.
Well, but I think the fact that you're here tonight is kind of the beginning. One of the elements, as I understand it, and
Right.
the effort is to include a dialogue with the people
Exactly.
in the impacted parcel structures, whatever you want to call it, to ensure that when the study is completed, that there isn't a disconnect between what the recommendations are and what's going on with the owners of those parcels. It doesn't make any sense for us to issue a report with recommendations that you look at and say, well, how did you come up with that? That isn't going to work for us. So
Right.
some element of dialogue as the report is developed with people in the impacted properties, I think, is going to be key to.
Are you willing to give me any indication in terms of what is that building? What is in there? What's the use?
I mean, it's a seasonal property. We use it just to spend time on the front porch and whatnot.
Okay.
But the property behind it, we do live in that 3 months a year. It's seasonal.
Is that this one?
Yep.
Okay.
So we do spend June, July, August up there with seasonal.
Yep.
So that also got flooded this past 2 weeks ago, so.
All right.
So who pays, I assume the town does, for rebuilding that launch ramp again? If, if the road level gets raised, that doesn't come from FEMA or the state, right?
No.
That's our doing.
No.
No,
Anything out of the road is expense to the town or to Josh for raising those houses or what, I assume, right?
That's an interesting.
It's hard to
I mean,
say.
is
Yeah.
it offering any money to raise, to put in like the helical piers supposed to raise some of the properties along there?
Not for private property as a general rule, at least not as part of this
Yes.
effort. There may be other
Funding
mechanisms
mechanisms,
that are
yeah.
separate and distinct from this particular study. And my guess is that because this is a planning level study, once the plan and solutions, desired solutions are identified and, the selectmen have nodded and say, yeah, this looks like appropriate conclusions, then the community is in a position to try to find funding for the final design and permitting and implementation of those things. And at that time, part and parcel with that, I think, would be exploring the options in terms of the funding that might be available for other companion pieces.
Question, so if you raise the road, the water's still pushing, will that push it sideways so that it goes up and around where the height of the road is? Because we have another property up higher, 41 Avenue Road.
Is that in this direction?
41, it's right across from 40.
The one you point, yeah, that one. Crossing the driveway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right there,
Yeah.
yeah. So would that, in other words, if you put the road up, is that gonna make that water then push towards a different direction?
So, I mean, so we've got a contour line here, I can't quite read it on that, but, I think it's
Is that
14 maybe. So it will push it in a different direction, but if the elevation of those properties is high enough, I mean, unless the tide comes up.
It won't make the water go higher in other areas.
Right.
It doesn't have that effect.
But if there's another low point
Just
somewhere
Yeah.
else on the road, it could push it, and there's a pathway to it, it could push it to that other low point. In this case, looking at the contours and the property, the elevation of that property, I wouldn't see that as being an issue that it would flood out that property. Unless those,
But, and, well, you can jump in or anyone else if I'm wrong with this. But as we've already heard, there's a culvert in this area. The road is unlikely to act as a dam that prevents water from
going through.
getting to other areas that may be on the other side of the road that aren't also elevated. So if the area on Luby Lane and around there is still at the same elevation that flooded with this storm, the road will be raised, but that doesn't necessarily, we're not creating a dike necessarily that will prevent flooding on the other side of that.
There are some ways to, well, you can put in flap gates or tide valves on those types of culverts, but it doesn't prevent the water that's
over there
that's going through that culvert from building up, because it can't push out against the tide on the other side, so.
It's not an easy
Yeah.
thing to do.
Yeah.
There on 40 Avenue, the water was right up to the house on the north and west sides.
So over in here.
Yeah, because that's where that culvert is, that generally the water runs through it.
Right about on that
Rick
contour.
said.
Ran through the wrong way.
It just went,
Yep.
flooded all of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did your basement flood out? Did you have
And there was no basement. was
no
there?
basement?
It was a crawl space,
Yeah, well, your study look at the impacts of erosion, because it's not just the water level going over. It's like if you're gonna do a retaining wall, that could be exacerbating erosion, both in Abner Point and Bethel Point. So is that part of the impacts you're gonna be looking at is?
I mean, our alternatives that we are presenting, again, at this level, we're not going to get into the minute details of erosion, but the alternatives that we present would be, ultimately they would not be designed to exacerbate erosion, let's put it that way. Are we gonna get into an erosion control plan at this level?
No, I
No,
just
but-
was wondering if it was part of your,
Right.
you know.
No, it's definitely part of the decision-making and the thought process that goes into it.
Side of water levels is.
Yep. And looking at some of the photos, it's pretty amazing what the water moves around, right? In terms of the size of the rocks and everything else. So it's,
Thank you.
all right. Did you have a preferred end time of it? I have a couple more slides, but.
What's your timeline? We do have to make, we need to make a decision tonight, or.
Yeah, let me get through a couple more slides and then we can.
Driveway, I should say, is,
So next steps, this is really comes out of my proposal, but we'll be making some site visits, doing some basic survey work, so you'll probably see some of our folks around at both these sites. If you have questions, don't hesitate to come out. Usually wearing yellow vests and all that kind of stuff, but so we're gonna prepare some base plans, pretty similar to what you saw tonight, a little more detail on there. Identify and evaluate sea level rise impacts, so we'll be looking at, you know, how many residences, what types of businesses are being impacted if this road floods out, all that kind of stuff. We will have another, we've got 2 community forums planned, so we will have another forum to allow people to ask more questions, provide more input if they want. Prepare concept adaptation plans, which we might start that before this first community forum, so we have some of that at the forum. Identify permitting and design costs. Community forum number 2 is really when we finalize these, just to give everybody another look at these before they go into the final report. And then we prepare a report and present it to the select board. So the discussion, but to talk a little bit about timing, haven't really had much chance to talk to Mary Ann about this, so I did want to chat with her a little bit in terms of what they were planning. We can kind of adapt our process as needed, but
Timeframe, I think we talked about 1 year for the project.
yeah, so I would envision that it's probably going to be a couple months before we get to another community forum, and then so again, it's as Mary Ann said, it's a year. We may be able to wrap it up a little bit earlier than that, but so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How do we send your photos? I've got some videos, but they're too
Yeah.
big to send through email, so.
I'm going to cover the.
I have some business cards up here, a few anyway. I don't carry too many business cards with me anymore, but I've got a few there.
I'm going to give them some direction in my closing.
Okay.
So just to wrap up tonight, I'm really glad we were able to do this. We have 2 different scenarios happening at the same time. But as far as, we would like to have more pictures, and if you have pictures and you can email them to, and I can write this down and include it in getting back to you afterwards, but then you can send them to climate@harpswell.me.us. And that will bring it all into this committee's work, and we can make them available to you. So I think that will be, and then we want to have a record of these locally as well. We got into a lot of damage that has happened since the storms of last week. If you did have damage, I ask you to go to the town website, because there is information on how to apply for, to FEMA, and information of the best way to proceed with your damage right now. And again, as I said, this was kind of a different project, more of a planning and having information available to the select board so that when it's time for them to do major road projects in town, and they're looking at these areas, they, number one, know to think about sea level rise and how it's going to be affected. And it also allows them to have an idea of what the costs would be to make the changes at the time. This, as I say, will go over a number of years. But this whole project started in 2016 with the idea to have information available to the select board and the town to make educated decisions on the amount of money informed, yes. So that's kind of where we are. But in the meantime, we had 2 big storms, or 3 big storms in a very short period of time. And we don't want to forget about that either. I think that's it. And as Will said, this project is scheduled to take about a year. My sense it'll be close to the end of this year. Well, and we will have a final report, and of course, we will have another meeting to go over them. And as far as the scenarios that we're going to take advantage of, I think that is probably a decision that, I don't know, that we talked about 2 different scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, thank you all. Oh, one other thing. There's a sign-up sheet. If you haven't had a chance to sign up, please do. That will enable us to get back to you with any information that we can share and let you know about the next meeting. So please, if you haven't done so, sign the sheet. Mark, did you have anything you wanted to say? Okay.
No, I don't. Was the question about the videos that are?
I'll follow up.
Okay.
Yeah, I told her to send them through.
Okay.
And by the way, if you want to get in touch with us at that email,
We escorted 2.
and we'll make arrangements.